What if I told you that the United States government knowingly protected the architects of history's most horrific human experiments? That while Nazi doctors faced justice at Nuremberg, their Japanese counterparts, who committed equally heinous crimes, were given immunity, prestigious careers, and comfortable retirements. This isn't a conspiracy theory, it's a documented fact. And the story of how America became complicit in covering up Unit 731's atrocities reveals one of the most shameful chapters in post-war history. This is World War IIpedia, where we uncover the stories they don't want you to know. August 15, 1945. Emperor Hirohito announces Japan's surrender. But in the chaos of defeat, General Shiro Ishii, the mastermind behind Unit 731's biological warfare program, was already executing his escape plan. As Soviet forces closed in on Harbin, Ishii ordered the systemic destruction of all evidence. All remaining prisoners, approximately 300 men, women, and children, were murdered. Buildings were dynamited. Documents were burned. Bodies were cremated and dumped into the Songhua River. But Ishii made one critical miscalculation. He assumed Americans wouldn't treat him like any other war criminal. He was wrong. Lieutenant Colonel Murray Sanders arrived in Japan in September 1945 as part of the Allied investigation into Japanese biological warfare. What he discovered would change everything. Sanders wasn't just investigating war crimes, he was evaluating potential assets for America's own biological weapons program. The Cold War was beginning and the United States wanted every advantage over the Soviet Union. When Sanders reported his findings to General Douglas MacArthur, a secret deal was struck that would haunt history. The agreement was simple and morally bankrupt. Complete immunity for Unit 731 personnel in exchange for exclusive access to their research data. No trials, no justice, no accountability. MacArthur's justification was purely strategic. As declassified documents reveal, American officials were terrified that Unit 731's biological warfare research would fall into Soviet hands. They convinced themselves that protecting mass murderers was a necessary evil to fight against communism. The irony is devastating. When American scientists finally analyzed the Japanese research, they concluded it was crude, ineffective, and failed to meet the basic scientific standards. The United States had sold its moral authority for worthless data. But the damage was done. While the world watched Nazi doctors face justice at Nuremberg, the architects of equally horrific crimes were quietly returning to their comfortable lives in Japan. To understand the true horror of what America protected, we need to hear from someone who was there. Hideo Shimizu was born in Nagano Prefecture in 1930, the son of a farming family. He was just an ordinary Japanese boy when his world changed forever. In March 1945, as Japan faced imminent defeat, 14-year-old Shimizu was approached by one of his school teachers. The teacher told him about an opportunity to serve the emperor as a technician on probation with the army in Harbin. The boy had no idea he was being recruited for history's most horrific human experimentation program. I knew nothing about what the army was or what it did specifically. I thought it was research meant to keep people from getting sick. But it was the exact opposite. Shimizu recalls today at age 94, "I thought it was research meant to keep people from getting sick, but it was the exact opposite." Shimizu was one of 34 young men who joined Unit 731's Youth Corps that spring. 3 of them, including Shimizu, were assigned to the Education Ministry Training Room on the second floor of the main headquarters building. There, they began learning the basics of pathogen cultivation, extracting body fluids from mice, checking for pathogens, and culturing deadly bacteria. "I had no clue at that time what the cultured pathogens were being used for," Shimizu remembers. The innocent teenager was being trained to participate in biological warfare without even knowing it. After several weeks of training, Shimizu's instructor made him an offer that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The instructor asked if he wanted to become a specialized technician for germ warfare or a surgeon after his internship. When Shimizu expressed interest in becoming a surgeon, the instructor told him he would need to dissect at least 3 cadavers. What happened next reveals the systemic dehumanization that made Unit 731's crimes possible. The instructor took Shimizu alone to the specimen room on the 2nd floor of the headquarters building. What the 14-year-old boy saw there would give him nightmares for the next 80 years. The shelves were lined with formalin-laden bottles that contained specimens of human organs of all kinds. Shimizu testified in a recent interview. The instructor told me these organs were obtained from vivisection experiments on Marutas. But the horror went deeper. Among the preserved organs were the remains of the most innocent victims imaginable. There were children. Shimizu's voice breaks as he recalls the scene. Specimens of fetuses from mothers' wombs and specimens of children. There were many of them. The children were dissected, with their organs taken out. When pressed for specifics, Shimizu can barely continue. From a fetus in the womb for a few months to newborn babies. I really believe that Unit 731 did every evil deed possible. Those were all innocent kids. The psychological impact on the teenager was immediate and lasting. Still, to this very day, I still can't imagine doing that to an innocent fetus. Dissecting the baby, still to this very day, I still can't imagine doing that to an innocent fetus. The boy becomes a victim. What Shimizu didn't realize at the time was that he himself was being used as a human test subject. The Japanese military were so callous about human life that they experimented on their own personnel, including children like Shimizu. I once ate a steamed bun offered by the army that contained bacteria, but I wasn't aware that I was part of the experiment until I read The Devil's Gluttony, written by Seiichi Morimura. Shimizu revealed decades later the effects were immediate and nearly fatal. After that meal, I suddenly had a fever of 42 degrees Celsius, which lasted for a week. I vaguely remember that a sanitary soldier came to measure my temperature and pulse once a day during that week, but I no longer felt alive. The fever broke, but Shimizu's ordeal wasn't over. That winter, he contracted typhoid, likely another result of the biological experiments being conducted around him. His health deteriorated so rapidly that he fled back to Japan, abandoning his post. When he finally reached a doctor in Japan, the diagnosis was grim. The doctor at the clinic told me the test results showed that I had so few red blood cells that he might not make it through the winter without treatment. Shimizu had become both witness and victim of Unit 731's crimes. But unlike the thousands who died in the experimental chambers, he survived to tell the story. While young Shimizu struggled to survive the effects of biological experimentation, the architects of Unit 731's crimes were being protected by the American government and rewarded with prestigious careers and enormous wealth. The contrast is morally obscene. As victims' families mourned their dead and survivors like Shimizu battled lifelong health problems, their tormentors lived lives of luxury and respect. General Shiro Ishii, the mastermind behind the entire program, didn't just escape justice. He was actively protected by American intelligence. After faking his own death to avoid Soviet capture, Ishii was found by the CIA and brought to their protection program. Rather than face trial for crimes against humanity, Ishii returned to private medical practice in Tokyo. He lived in a comfortable home, maintained his medical license, and was treated as a respected member of Japanese society. When he died of throat cancer in 1959, it was peacefully in his own bed, a natural death denied to the hundreds of thousands he tortured to death. Dr. Masashi Kitano, who succeeded Ishii as Unit 731's commander, became one of post-war Japan's most successful entrepreneurs. In 1951, he founded the Japan Blood Bank, using knowledge gained from Unit 731's blood transfusion experiments on live prisoners. The timing was perfect. The Korean War created enormous demand for blood products, and Kitano's company made massive profits selling to the US military. The blood products and plasma technologies that made him wealthy were developed through the torture and murder of Chinese civilians and Allied prisoners of war. Kitano didn't just get rich, he became a pillar of Japanese society. He lived in a mansion, drove luxury cars, and was celebrated as a medical pioneer. The Japan Blood Bank grew into Green Cross Corporation, one of Japan's largest pharmaceutical companies. Dr. Ryoichi Naito, another Unit 731 researcher, founded what would become a major pharmaceutical empire. He used his Unit 731 connections and American protection to build a business empire worth millions. Naito lived lavishly, owning multiple properties and enjoying the respect of Japan's medical establishment. Dr. Yoshio Shinozuka, a Youth Corps member who witnessed his friend being vivisected alive, went on to a successful career in Japan's pharmaceutical industry. Despite his direct participation in human experimentation, he faced no consequences and lived comfortably until his death. The pattern was consistent across Unit 731's leadership. Men who had tortured children to death became university professors, pharmaceutical executives, and respected members of society. They sent their own children to the best schools, vacationed at luxury resorts, and were honored at medical conferences. The American protection of Unit 731 criminals wasn't just about individual immunity deals. It was a systemic institutional cover-up that involved the highest levels of government and created a network of complicity that persists today. The deal was structured through multiple layers of secrecy. The State Department, the Pentagon, and the CIA all participated in protecting war criminals, while publicly supporting the Nuremberg principles of international justice. When the Soviet Union attempted to prosecute Unit 731 members at the Khabarovsk war crimes trial in 1949, the United States actively worked to discredit the proceedings. American officials dismissed Soviet evidence as communist propaganda, even though they knew it was accurate. At Khabarovsk, 12 Unit 731 members finally faced some form of justice. Kiyoshi Kawashima, who served as director of the Bacterial Production Department, confessed that Unit 731 killed no less than 3,000 soldiers and civilians from China, the Soviet Union, and other countries through experimentation. But the West's dismissal of the trial meant that crucial testimony about Unit 731's crimes was ignored for decades. Only 12 men faced trial, and most were released by 1956. The other 3,595 Unit 731 personnel never faced any consequences for their crimes. Meanwhile, the U.S. classified all Unit 731 research data and transferred it to Fort Detrick, America's biological warfare facility in Maryland. The information remained secret for over 50 years, protecting both American and Japanese interests while denying justice to victims. The survivor's burden. For Hideo Shimizu, the knowledge of what he had witnessed became an unbearable burden. For decades, he followed military orders to keep quiet about his experiences. He told no one, not his wife, not his children, not his closest friends. My superiors became professors at universities, presidents of pharmaceutical companies, members of the self-defense forces. Shimizu says bitterly, "Can you believe it? And me, I couldn't even work in a hospital." While his former colleagues prospered, Shimizu struggled. The psychological trauma of what he had witnessed, combined with the physical effects of being used as a test subject, left him unable to pursue a medical career. He worked various jobs, always carrying the secret of what he had seen. The contrast with his former Unit 731 colleagues was stark. While they lived in luxury, Shimizu struggled with poverty and health problems. While they were celebrated as medical pioneers, he was haunted by nightmares of the specimen room. "I often wonder why on earth Unit 731 had done so many evil things," Shimizu reflects. "Many Marudus died, and the Japanese soldiers were also dissected." So the psychological toll was immense. Shimizu suffered from recurring nightmares, often waking in cold sweats as the images of preserved children's organs flashed through his mind. Even today, at 94, seeing his own grandson reminds him of the horrors he witnessed. "I can't imagine my own flesh and blood enduring such suffering," he says, his voice breaking. The decision to speak. For over 70 years, Shimizu kept his secret, but in 2016, everything changed. He attended a peace-themed exhibition where he saw surgical knives and other evidence left by a former Unit 731 soldier. The display triggered something in the elderly man. "I then decided to disclose my own identity as a Unit 731 Youth Corps member, participate in peace activities, and expose the crimes of the invading Japanese bacterial forces," Shimizu explained. The decision came at enormous personal cost. When Shimizu began speaking publicly about his experiences, he faced immediate backlash from Japanese nationalists who prefer to deny their country's wartime atrocities. Angry nationalists routinely attack him online, according to recent reports. The harassment became so severe that it affected his family relationships. "My daughters don't come to this house now at all," Shimizu says sadly. "Not at all. I just don't understand." The situation worsened after Shimizu made a trip to China in 2019 to apologize to victims and their families. The gesture was well received in China, viewed as a long overdue acknowledgement of Japanese atrocities. But in Japan, it made Shimizu a target for nationalist anger. Even his family is now distant, especially since his trip to China, observers note. The price of telling the truth has been the loss of his family relationships and social isolation in his final years. The pharmaceutical empire built on blood. The most infuriating aspect of the Unit 731 cover-up is how the protected criminals use their immunity to build vast business empires. The Japan blood bank founded by Unit 731 Commander Masiji Kitano became a case study in how war crimes can be transformed into corporate profits. Kitano's company didn't just succeed, it dominated Japan's blood products industry. Using techniques developed through human experimentation, the Japan Blood Bank became the primary supplier of blood products to both Japanese hospitals and the U.S. military during the Korean War. The profits were enormous. Military contracts alone brought in millions of dollars, all based on knowledge gained through the torture and murders of prisoners. Kitano used these profits to expand his business empire, eventually renaming the company Green Cross Corporation. Green Cross became one of Japan's most successful pharmaceutical companies, with Kitano serving as its president and living in extraordinary luxury. He owned multiple properties, including a mansion in Tokyo's most exclusive district. He drove imported cars, vacationed at expensive resorts, and was treated as a pillar of Japanese society. But the Unit 731 connection would eventually come back to haunt the company. In the 1980s, Green Cross imported large quantities of blood plasma from the United States. The company knew the plasma was contaminated with HIV, but continued importing it anyway. The decision was chilling reminiscent of Unit 731's experimental mentality. Even after the U.S. Centers for Disease Control warned about AIDS transmission through unheated blood products in 1982, Green Cross continued offering contaminated products to Japanese hemophiliacs. The result was a public health catastrophe. Thousands of Japanese hemophiliacs contracted HIV, and over 400 died. It was as if the ghosts of Unit 731's experimental disposition were reappearing, with Japanese citizens becoming unwitting test subjects, just as Chinese prisoners had decades earlier. The scandal finally exposed Green Cross's Unit 731 connections, but by then, Kitano and other war criminals had lived full, prosperous lives. They had enjoyed decades of wealth and respect, while their victims remained forgotten. The network of complicity. The success of Unit 731's criminals in post-war Japan wasn't just individual achievement. It was systemic institutional support. The Japanese medical establishment, knowing full well the backgrounds of these men, welcomed them with open arms. Universities hired Unit 731 researchers as professors. Medical journals published their research without questioning its origins. Pharmaceutical companies competed to recruit men with Unit 731 experience, viewing their expertise as valuable assets. The National Institute of Health of Japan, founded in 1947, was led by former Unit 731 personnel. The Institute of Medical Science at the University of Tokyo similarly welcomed war criminals into prestigious positions. This wasn't ignorance, it was willful complicity. The Japanese medical community knew exactly who these men were and what they had done. But rather than face the moral implications of their crimes, they chose to benefit from their expertise. The pattern extended far beyond medicine. Former Unit 731 members found positions in government, academia, and industry. They were promoted, honored, and celebrated while their victims remained nameless and forgotten. The continuing conspiracy. Perhaps the most disturbing part is that the cover-up continues today. Both American and Japanese governments still withhold thousands of Unit 731 documents, maintaining a conspiracy of silence that has lasted nearly 80 years. During the COVID-19 pandemic, some scientists called for releasing this classified information to help with pandemic research. The argument was compelling. If Unit 731's research contained any useful data about infectious diseases, it could potentially save lives during a global health crisis. Both governments refused. The information remains locked away in classified archives, protecting the reputations of institutions that enabled these crimes and preventing full historical accountability. Recent Freedom of Information Act requests have been revealed that the American Biological Weapons Program at Fort Detrick used Unit 731 data well into the Cold War era. Some researchers argue that this collaboration influenced American biological warfare research for decades, creating an uncomfortable legacy that both governments prefer to keep buried. The classified documents likely contain evidence of ongoing collaboration between American scientists and former Unit 731 personnel throughout the 1950s and 1960s. This would explain why governments remain so reluctant to release the files. They would expose decades of continued cooperation with war criminals. The consequences of America's deal with Unit 731 extended far beyond individual criminals escaping justice. It established a precedent that national security interests could override basic human rights and moral obligations, a precedent that would haunt American foreign policy for decades. The cover-up also had devastating effects on victims and their families. Without official acknowledgement of the crime, survivors struggled for decades to get recognition, compensation, or even basic historical accuracy about what happened to their loved ones. Chinese survivors didn't attempt to seek justice until 1998, over 50 years after the war ended. When they finally brought their case to Tokyo District Court, the legal battle revealed the full extent of the institutional cover-up. Judge Koji Iwata made the first official recognition that Unit 731 had engaged in biological warfare, stating in his 2002 ruling, "The court recognizes that the activities of Unit 731 and its related units constituted biological warfare and human experimentation." But he rejected all compensation claims, leaving victims with acknowledgement but no justice. The judge's reasoning was telling. He argued that too much time had passed and that international law at the time didn't clearly prohibit such experiments. It was a legal technicality that ignored the fundamental moral reality of what had occurred. The survivors' final mission. Today, Hideo Shimizu continues his mission to expose the truth about Unit 731, despite the personal cost. At 94, he has delivered 6 public speeches this year alone, each one a painful recounting of the horrors he witnessed as a child. Nowadays, many forces in Japan only mention the country's suffering in the war, without mentioning the invasion and harm to other countries, Shimizu observes. They refuse to display the testimony and materials of the former members of Unit 731 because they do not want to tell the children about such cruel realities. His response is uncompromising. "I want to say that Japan has carried out cruel atrocities, including murder. We are telling our children the truth, aren't we?" Shimizu's courage stands in stark contrast to the comfortable silence maintained by Japanese institutions. While museums refuse to display Unit 731 evidence because it's too graphic for children, Shimizu argues that confronting this history is essential for preventing its repetition. Facts are facts and should be accepted correctly, he insists. No more war is the most profound lesson to be learned. The elderly survivor's determination is remarkable. Despite losing his family relationships and facing constant harassment, he continues speaking out because he understands what's at stake. He knows that silence enables repetition, and that comfortable lies are more dangerous than uncomfortable truths. The Unit 731 cover-up represents far more than just individual criminals escaping justice. It was a systemic betrayal that corrupted the very institutions meant to uphold human rights and international law. While American prosecutors at Nuremberg declared that following orders was no excuse for war crimes, American intelligence officers were simultaneously cutting deals with Japanese war criminals using the same defense. The hypocrisy was stark and deliberate. This moral compromise didn't just fail strategically. The research data proved worthless, but it established a dangerous precedent. From Operation Paperclip's protection of Nazi scientists to Cold War alliances with brutal dictators, the Unit 731 deal showed that America would sacrifice moral principles for perceived strategic advantage. The betrayal corrupted every institution involved. The medical establishment incorporated torture-derived data into biological warfare programs. The legal system bypassed international justice standards. The intelligence community served war criminals instead of American interests. National security became a shield for protecting foreign mass murderers. The effects rippled across generations and continents. Victims' families never received justice, while perpetrators' descendants inherited wealth built on mass murder. Other nations learned that war crimes would be prosecuted selectively, based on politics rather than principles, weakening international law and human rights protections worldwide. When the most powerful nation prioritizes strategic interests over justice, it becomes nearly impossible to hold anyone accountable for war crimes. The Unit 731 cover-up didn't just betray the victims, it betrayed the fundamental principles that separated civilization from barbarism. The men who tortured thousands to death lived comfortable lives and died peacefully in their beds. Their victims remain largely forgotten, their stories suppressed. This is the real legacy of Unit 731. Not just the crimes themselves, but the systemic effort to hide them from history that continues today. As Hideo Shimizu enters his final years, his testimony becomes increasingly precious. He's the last living witness willing to speak publicly about Unit 731's crimes, and his voice carries the weight of history. It was hell on earth, Shimizu says simply. So many Marudas died, and the Japanese soldiers were also dissected. I often wonder why on earth Unit 731 had done so many evil things. His question haunts us because we know the answer. Unit 731 committed these crimes because they could, because their government authorized it, because their society enabled it, and because the world's most powerful nation chose to protect them rather than prosecute them. Shimizu's courage in speaking out despite the personal cost offers a different model. It shows that individuals can choose truth over comfort, justice over convenience, and moral courage over social acceptance. Although I spent only 4 months in Unit 731, I was deep in regret when I later learned that the team I joined was the unit that invaded other countries, carried out human dissection and germ warfare, Shimizu reflects. His regret is genuine and profound, but his decision to speak out transforms that regret into something more powerful. A testimony that honors the victims and challenges the living to confront uncomfortable truths. The truth about Unit 731 took 50 years to emerge, and we still don't know the full story. But every document that surfaces, every survivor who speaks out, and every researcher who refuses to let this history be buried brings us closer to the complete truth. The cover-up continues, but so does the resistance to it. Historians, journalists, and survivors like Hideo Shimizu refuse to let these crimes disappear into comfortable amnesia. If you found this investigation valuable, Subscribe to World War IIpedia for more untold stories from history's darkest chapters. Hit the notification bell and share this video, because these stories deserve to be known, no matter how uncomfortable they make us. Remember, those who forget history are doomed to repeat it, and those who cover up history are complicit in its crimes.